I watched my mother sign the papers with shaking hands, her 70-year-old fingers trembling as the notary pressed her stamp down one final time. This wasn't supposed to happen this way. Not on her birthday. Not like this. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It was steel. 3 months earlier, everything felt normal. My name is Jennifer, and I live in a comfortable suburban home in Columbus, Ohio. A 4-bedroom colonial with white shutters and a manicured lawn that my husband Michael takes pride in. We've been married 22 years. 2 kids, Brandon, who's 19 and in his sophomore year at Ohio State, and Ashley, 16, who's obsessed with volleyball and her phone in equal measure. The kind of life you see in magazines. The kind of life where nothing bad happens, because you've done everything right. My mother, Linda, had been living with us for almost 2 years at that point. She'd moved in after my father passed away, a sudden heart attack that nobody saw coming, least of all him. He was 68, strong as an ox, the kind of man who could fix anything and never complained about anything else. Then, one Tuesday morning, he just wasn't there anymore. Mom needed a place to stay. Michael and I didn't even discuss it. Of course she would move in. She was family. She was our mother. We had the space, the guest bedroom downstairs, close to the kitchen, with its own bathroom. We could keep an eye on her, make sure she was eating right, that she wasn't just sitting alone in that empty house on Maple Street, drinking coffee and staring at the walls. It's just temporary, she kept saying those first few months. Just until I get back on my feet, get my head straight. But it wasn't temporary, and we all knew it wasn't temporary. It was just easier to pretend. Linda was a sweet woman. Everyone said so. Quiet, unobtrusive, the kind of mother-in-law that other people envied. She didn't criticize how I kept house or how I raised the kids. She made pot roast on Sundays without being asked. She sent money to Brandon for his books. She taught Ashley how to make her grandmother's sugar cookies, the ones with the butter and the real vanilla extract, none of that imitation garbage. Michael loved having her there. His own mother had died when he was 12, and I think my mother filled something in him that had been empty for 30 years. They'd watch the Browns games together on Sunday afternoons, and I'd hear him laugh, really laugh, at her dry commentary about the quarterback's decision-making. "That was dumber than a box of rocks," she'd say, and Michael would slap his knee and shake his head. The kids adored her. Brandon would come home from classes and sit in the kitchen with her while she made dinner, telling her about his chemistry exams and his roommate problems. Ashley would curl up next to her on the couch, and they'd watch those baking shows together, the ones where people make elaborate cakes that don't look like food at all. I loved her too. I want to be clear about that. I still do. But I was also tired. Not in a dramatic way, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from managing a household where someone else's grief lives in the walls. From making sure there's always decaffeinated coffee because the regular stuff makes her jittery. From listening to the same stories about my father, the time he fixed the carburetor, the time he built the deck, the time he won money at the casino and surprised everyone with a trip to Niagara Falls. Good stories, important stories, but stories I'd heard before. Stories that made the house feel less like home and more like a memorial. I work as a medical administrator at Riverside Hospital, 40 hours a week, sometimes more. Michael's in commercial real estate, the kind of job that means his phone is always ringing and he's always stressed about deals falling through or interest rates or zoning laws. Between the two of us, we're doing okay. Not rich, but comfortable. We have a 401k, a college fund for the kids, a mortgage that we're on track to pay off in 12 years. We take a family vacation every summer, usually to the beach in South Carolina. Everything was exactly as it should be. Until the morning in May when Michael got home late from work and called a family meeting. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had hundreds of ordinary dinners, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Linda was upstairs in her room, reading. The kids were upstairs too, Brandon on his laptop, Ashley getting ready for bed. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. I remember my stomach did a little flip. Nothing good ever comes after those words. "Your mom," he continued, and I felt my shoulders tense. "She's been struggling, financially, I mean. She hasn't told you because she didn't want to burden you. My mother, it turned out, had not been as financially stable as I'd assumed. My father's medical bills, the ones that came after his heart attack, the emergency room visit, the 3 days in the ICU before he died, had been catastrophic. Their insurance had covered most of it, but not all of it. There were still $40,000 in debt. Debt that had been sitting on her credit cards, accumulating interest, for the past 2 years. She'd been paying the minimum payments out of her Social Security, but it wasn't enough. Michael had looked at her finances. I don't remember him asking her permission, but maybe he had and I'd forgotten, and he had a plan. "We can refinance the house," he said. "The house on Maple Street. Your mom owns it free and clear. If we take out a home equity loan, we can consolidate her debt, pay it all off at once. She'd have a much lower monthly payment, and the interest rate would be way better." He looked at me like he'd just solved a complex math problem, like he'd done something generous and smart and responsible. I should have questioned this. I should have asked more questions. I should have talked to my mother before my husband made financial decisions about her property. But I didn't. I was tired, and I was relieved that someone else was taking care of the problem. And I said, "That sounds good. That's very kind of you." That was the mistake. That was the moment when everything started to shift. Like continental plates moving so slowly you can't see it happening, but underneath, the earth is breaking. My mother turned 70 on the 3rd Saturday of July. My mother's 70th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration. I'd booked a private room at the Italian restaurant downtown, Marcello's, the nice one with the cloth napkins and the real Chianti. My sister Karen flew in from Pittsburgh. Michael's brother Steve came with his wife. We had 23 people there, and everyone brought cards and flowers and bottles of wine. Mom wore a blue dress that brought out her eyes. She smiled the whole night, cut the cake, tiramisu her favorite, and thanked everyone for coming. She hugged me tight when she thought no one was looking, and I remember thinking how lucky we were, how she was handling her grief with such grace. That was a Tuesday night. The papers came the following Monday. Michael called me at work. "Your mom needs to sign some documents for the refinance," he said. "The notary can come to the house tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Can you get home?" I didn't think twice. Of course, I'll be there. The notary was a woman named Patricia, mid-50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She sat at our kitchen table with a thick folder full of documents. Mom came downstairs in her cardigan, and Michael was already there, pacing near the refrigerator like he always did when he was nervous about money. "Let me explain what we're doing," Michael said, sitting down next to my mother. "This is a home equity line of credit against your house on Maple Street. The appraised value is $420,000. We're pulling out $50,000 to cover all your credit card debt, consolidated into one payment, much lower interest rate." My mother nodded slowly. She put on her reading glasses. Patricia began turning pages. I remember standing in the doorway, still in my work scrubs, watching this happen like it was someone else's life. The kitchen was bright with afternoon sun. Everything felt normal. Everything felt fine. "The monthly payment will be $480, Michael continued. "That's half what you're paying right now on the credit cards. You'll save thousands over the life of the loan." Mom signed the first page, then the second. Patricia stamped and initialed. The pen moved steadily across each document. But then, on the 7th page, my mother stopped. She looked up at Michael, and in that moment, something shifted in her face. Something I'd never seen before. "Michael," she said quietly, "this says the house is being put in your name, too, as a joint owner." The room went very still. "That's just for the lender," Michael said quickly. "It's standard. It protects the line of credit. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, my mother said. She removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on the table. Why would my house need to be in your name to protect a line of credit? Mom, don't make this complicated, Michael said, and I heard something in his voice that I'd never heard before either. Irritation, impatience. The tone you use when you're talking to someone who's being stupid and inconvenient. I'm not making it complicated, my mother said. She stood up. I'm asking a straightforward question. Why does my house, the house your father-in-law built with his own hands, the house I've lived in for 42 years, need to have your name on the deed? Michael's jaw tightened. Because if you can't make the payments, the bank needs someone else responsible. I've made every payment on every debt I've ever had in my entire life, my mother said, her voice very level. I've never missed a bill, not once. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Jennifer, she said, did you know about this? I opened my mouth, closed it. No. Michael just said it was a financial thing. I thought... You thought, my mother repeated. You thought your husband would tell you if he was putting himself on the deed to my house? You thought he would ask me about it before signing papers in front of a notary. The room felt smaller. Patricia was looking at her hands. I'm not signing this, my mother said, and she stood up and walked out of the kitchen. We heard her footsteps on the stairs. Her bedroom door closed. Michael's face went white, then red. She doesn't understand how finance works, he said, mostly to Patricia. She's emotional. She's grieving. This is what's best for her. But Patricia was already putting papers back into her folder. I can't notarize anything if the signer isn't willing, she said. Maybe you all should talk about this and reschedule. She left 10 minutes later. Michael didn't speak to me for 3 days. When he did, it was to explain that my mother was being irrational, that she was sabotaging her own financial future, that he was only trying to help and this was the thanks he got. He said it so many times, in so many ways, that I almost believed it. Almost. But I kept thinking about his face when my mother asked the question. I kept thinking about the irritation in his voice. I kept thinking about the fact that he'd never mentioned, not once, that my mother's house would be going on his name. I went to my mother's room on the 4th day. She was sitting in the chair by the window, reading. She didn't look up when I came in. Can we talk? I asked. I think we should, she said. I sat on the edge of the bed. Why didn't you tell me about the house thing? My mother set down her book. Because I didn't know about it either until the notary was sitting at our table. Your husband told me this was just paperwork. He said it was standard. He said it would protect my interests. That doesn't make any sense. Exactly, my mother said. So I asked him why, and he couldn't give me a good answer. Not a real one. I felt something cold move through my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying, my mother said slowly, that I think your husband is planning to take my house. I laughed. Actually laughed. It sounded hysterical even to my own ears. That's crazy! He's my husband. He wouldn't. Jennifer, my mother said. I've been married for 45 years. I know how men think about money and property. I know what it looks like when someone is laying groundwork. Groundwork for what? For taking what isn't his. I left her room and went downstairs. Michael was in his study, working on his laptop. I closed the door behind me. My mother thinks you're trying to steal her house, I said. Michael looked up. He actually smiled. That's ridiculous. Then explain why you didn't tell me her name would be on the deed with yours. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this, he said, irrationally, emotionally. It's a financial tool, Jennifer. That's all it is. Don't patronize me, I said. Explain it to me like I'm not an idiot and maybe I'll understand. He closed his laptop. If I'm on the deed with her and she passes away, the house transfers to me automatically. No probate, no complications. It's efficient estate planning. The words just hung there in the air between us. She's 70 years old, I said. Are you planning for her to die? I'm planning for reality, Michael said. People die. Houses are valuable assets. If we don't set this up now, when she does pass, the estate gets messy. There could be taxes, legal fees, all kinds of complications. Or, I said slowly, we could wait until she actually dies before we worry about it. That's not how smart people handle finances, Michael said. He turned back to his laptop. Your mother doesn't understand. You don't understand. But in 5 years, when the market goes up and the house is worth $500,000, you're going to be very grateful I thought this through. I stood there for a moment, watching my husband not look at me. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat in the dark for an hour. That night, I called my sister. Tell me I'm crazy, I said. Karen listened while I explained everything. The debt, the refinance, the deed situation, all of it. That's not crazy, she said when I was done. That's predatory. That's your husband setting up to take Mom's house. But why would he do that? We're not hurting for money. It's not about needing money, Karen said. It's about control. It's about knowing he owns something valuable. Some men are like that. They collect things. Real estate is just another thing to collect. He's not like that, I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. Jennifer, listen to me. Mom needs to talk to a lawyer, right now, before anything else gets signed. I knew she was right. The next morning, I told Michael I was taking my mother to the dentist. Instead, we drove to the office of Margaret Chen, an estate attorney that Karen had found online. Margaret's office was on the 4th floor of a downtown building with a view of the river. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. My mother explained the situation. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When my mother was finished, Margaret set down her pen. "Has he asked you to sign anything else?" she asked. "Not yet," my mother said. "Good. Don't. And I need to see the paperwork he had you almost sign. Bring me copies of everything." "What does this mean?" I asked. "What is he trying to do?" Margaret looked at me. "What he's trying to do is set up a situation where, if his marriage ends, he has a claim on your mother's house, or where he can convince her to sell it and give him the proceeds, or where, if she becomes incapacitated, he can claim authority over her assets as a co-owner." "That's insane," I said. "That's actually pretty standard predatory behavior," Margaret said. "I see it maybe once a month. It's usually in-laws. Someone who wants to secure assets before they're locked out of them." My mother's face had gone pale. "How is this legal?" "It's legal if she signs it," Margaret said, "which is why she didn't, and why she shouldn't." We left Margaret's office with a plan. My mother would hire Margaret to help her. We would tell Michael that my mother had consulted a lawyer and was advised not to sign anything. We would see what he did next. What he did next was lose his mind. That evening, when he got home from work, I told him, "My mom talked to a lawyer. She's not comfortable with putting your name on the deed." Michael's face went dark. Actually dark, like someone had flipped a switch. He slammed his briefcase down on the kitchen counter so hard that a bowl of apples jumped. "She's ungrateful," he said. His voice was very quiet, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been yelling. I try to help her, and she stabs me in the back. "She poisons you against me. She's a parasite, Jennifer. She's been a parasite since the day she moved in." "She's my mother," I said. "And she's costing us money," he said. "She's eating our food, using our utilities, taking up space in this house. I've been paying for her existence out of the goodness of my heart, and this is what I get. You've been paying for Michael. She buys her own groceries. She contributes to the household. Not enough, he said. He pointed at me. You need to choose, your mother or your husband, because I'm not living under the same roof with her anymore. She goes or I go. My stomach dropped. You're serious? Completely serious, he said. She's out by the end of the month, or I'm calling a divorce attorney. He walked out of the kitchen and went to his study and closed the door. I stood there by the counter, my hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Brandon came downstairs 5 minutes later. Was that Dad yelling? No, I said automatically. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to my husband of 22 years, the man I'd built a life with, and I listened to him breathe, and I tried to understand when he'd become a stranger. The next morning, I called Margaret Chun. He's threatening divorce if my mother doesn't move out, I told her. Okay, Margaret said calmly. Here's what you need to do. Document everything. Get copies of all financial records, bank statements, credit card statements, mortgage documents, everything. If he's serious about divorce, you need to protect yourself. I don't want a divorce, I said. I understand, Margaret said, but you need to be prepared. I spent that week moving like a ghost through my own house. I went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Ashley with her homework, went to bed. Michael barely spoke to me. He slept in the guest room. The house felt like a tomb. My mother stayed in her room. I could hear her on the phone with Karen sometimes, their voices low. I didn't know what to do. I was caught between two people I loved, and I was failing both of them. On Friday, Michael came home with a letter from a lawyer, a real lawyer on real letterhead. It stated that he was prepared to file for divorce and that he was seeking 50% of all marital assets, including the house we lived in, and that he expected Jennifer Hartley to buy out his portion or agree to a sale. He set it on the kitchen table and left it there. I read it 3 times. Then I went upstairs and packed a bag. We're going to Karen's, I told my mother, tonight. What about Michael? She asked. I don't know, I said. I don't know anything anymore. We left Columbus that night. Karen picked us up and drove us to Pittsburgh. I called the hospital from Karen's car and told them I was taking a leave of absence. I didn't know what else to do. The next morning, Margaret called me. Your husband just filed for divorce, she said. I got the notice from his attorney. He's claiming abandonment. We've been gone less than 24 hours, I said. I know, it's a tactic. He's trying to establish that you left him. We need to move fast. Can you come back to Columbus tomorrow? We need to go to the house and get documents, and we need to file our own petition. I looked at my mother sitting in Karen's living room, drinking coffee, looking small and tired. Yes, I said, I'll be there. The next week was a blur of lawyers and paperwork and phone calls. Michael's attorney was aggressive, claiming I'd abandoned the marriage, demanding the house, demanding support payments. Margaret was methodical, gathering evidence, building a case, showing that Michael's behavior was abusive and controlling. And then, 2 weeks after we left, Margaret called me with something. I found something, she said, in his email records that we obtained through Discovery. He's been communicating with a real estate investor, someone named Richard Hartwick. They've been discussing your mother's house as a future acquisition. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Margaret said, that your husband was planning to acquire your mother's house, possibly through foreclosure on the refinance line of credit or through some other mechanism, and then flip it for profit. He had a buyer lined up. I felt like I couldn't breathe. There's more, Margaret said. The line of credit he was trying to get your mother to sign, it had a balloon payment at year 7. $50,000 due all at once. If your mother couldn't pay it, the bank could foreclose. And if your husband was on the deed, he'd have some claim to the property in the foreclosure proceedings. He was going to let my mother lose her house, I said. Yes, Margaret said simply. I told my mother. We were sitting in Margaret's office and I told her what Michael had planned. Her face didn't change for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes. How could I not see it? She asked. Because he was your son-in-law, Margaret said. Because you trusted him. Because he was good at hiding it. What happens now? I asked. Now, Margaret said, we use this. This is fraud. This is attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person. We take this to the police, we add it to your divorce petition, and we make sure he never gets close to your mother's house, or your assets, ever again. The police investigation took 3 months. They interviewed Michael, his lawyer, the real estate investor Richard Hartwick, the bank. They looked at emails, financial records, everything. The prosecutor decided there was enough evidence to charge Michael with attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, conspiracy, and fraud. He was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I found out when the police called me to ask if I was safe. The divorce proceeded quickly after that. Michael's attorney realized he had no leverage. The evidence was damning. He agreed to a settlement. I kept the house, I kept the savings, I kept custody of the kids. Michael got nothing. Nothing but a criminal record and a date in court. The trial was in December. I had to testify. So did my mother. So did Margaret, explaining the financial schemes. So did Richard Hartwick, who cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for immunity. Michael sat at the defendant's table and didn't look at me once. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 2. He also ordered him to pay restitution to my mother for her legal fees. As he was being led out of the courtroom, Michael finally looked at me. His expression was cold, angry, like I was the one who'd betrayed him, not the other way around. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said. But it wasn't over, not really. It was just a different kind of beginning. I divorced Michael. I kept the house, the colonial with white shutters that he'd been so proud of, and I eventually refinanced it in my own name. My mother stayed with us. Brandon and Ashley stayed with us. We rebuilt. My mother eventually moved back into her own house on Maple Street, but she came to ours for dinner every Sunday. She and I worked through the betrayal together, not just Michael's betrayal, but mine too, for not listening to her, for not asking the hard questions sooner. It took time, a lot of time. But here's what I learned. The people who love you will fight for you. And the people who don't will try to own you. My mother saw the difference before I did. She trusted her instincts when everyone else was telling her she was being ungrateful, irrational, emotional. She wasn't. She was just a mother who knew her daughter was in danger, even if her daughter couldn't see it yet. And that made all the difference.